Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Today I'm posting my first Reads and Rambles of the new year. And I thought I would start with a very brief personal update, and then talk about my reading over both the holiday season and the days since then. Today, I'm not going to talk about my reading plans for the months ahead of us, but that's coming very soon. Let me say first how sorry I was to hear about the death of Sean D. Standfast. I always loved seeing his deeply bookish videos appear in my subscription feed. His Desert Island series, especially, with booktubers from all over, brought me so much joy. He will be so incredibly missed here on BookTube, and I'll be keeping some of his closest friends here in my thoughts. On to the personal update. My shoulder is healing very nicely. There is still a long way to go. Rotator cuff surgery often takes 12 months for basic recovery of both mobility and strength, and I'm just at 3 months. I no longer have to wear a sling. I can do a fair bit of movement, including washing my hair with both my hands, as long as I bend my head down a little bit. I can also drink from a teacup with my right hand. But I'm not supposed to lift more than about that amount of weight yet. I'll be continuing in my physical therapy for many more months, and every week I get better and better. My shoulder is still a little bit sore, but nothing terrible, and it's definitely improving over time. I've also been going through a long and fairly intense workup for something else. And after a whole series of relatively uncomfortable procedures, this morning I just got back conclusive results that were really good news. And that's been quite a relief. As for holiday reading, in an effort to make a nod to both Dickens for Christmas, hosted by Alan Sreeds, and Bookish Travels, as well as Ghost of Christmas Past, hosted by Revenant Reads, Rainer Read Stuff, Books Chat with Pat, and Cobaltdragon, I read Charles Dickens' classic, A Christmas Carol. It was really lovely to revisit it this year, although I've seen film adaptations of it in the recent past, and a theater performance of it more recently. It's been a tremendously long time since I actually read the novella. Since the season has now passed, and I really don't have anything new to say about this charming story that all of the rest of you have not already said, I'll leave it at that, except to show you my new mug. Let me back up first. For Victober this year, I revisited a tradition I had celebrated in previous years, telling you about both a particular tea I had brewed that day and also the teacup I was drinking from. I had what I thought then was a lovely collection of mugs that had special meaning to me, handmade by people I love, or things people found for me on their travels, or that I had acquired in the gift shop of an author's house, etc. As Victober started, and I was briefly recounting some of my September reads, I wanted to show off a kind of tea that was named for Shakespeare. The company that made the tea donates a portion of sales to the Globe Theatre. And I mentioned that I was kind of shocked that I didn't have a Shakespeare mug of some sort, given that I raised a Shakespeare nerd and bought numerous items of Shakespeare merch for my son. Well, to my great surprise, soon after I posted that video, I got an unexpected package from a few of my viewers, a set of people who knew each other, and decided to send me a collection of mugs with literary pictures on them. They are amazing. Some of my favorite books and authors are on the sides of the mugs. I was totally taken aback, and since then I've received quite a number of other literary mugs and a special hat, too, from viewers and other booktubers. I'm very grateful, truly, and I'm really looking forward to showing them off as the year goes by. But please don't send me any more. I have totally run out of room in my mug cabinet. Now I'm wondering if I should be planning my annual TBR around the authors and books that appear on these new mugs. We'll see. Anyway, the first mug from this new set is making its screen debut today, this lovely Christmas Carol mug. And I filled it with a tea that I love to drink all winter, a spiced tea with citrus in it. Some people call it Christmas tea. I grew up calling it Russian tea. Some people make a mix of powdered tea, powdered tang, tang still exists, and cinnamon. But my family used to make it from scratch, or sometimes from near scratch. Basically, boil together water, a cinnamon sticks and some cloves, sugar if you like, and squeeze a couple of lemons and oranges and save that juice elsewhere. Put the rinds in the boiling water and let it all steep for a bit. And when you're ready to serve, add the juice back in and possibly some pineapple juice too. I love it hot. And leftovers are great, either reheated or served cold. To be honest, when I'm making a cup for myself without any party leftovers on hand, I usually start by making a cup with a tea bag of some kind of spiced tea. Growing up, we always had Bigelow's Constant Comment on hand, which works perfectly. Harney & Sons holiday tea flavor works well too. Anything with cinnamon-tight spices in it should be perfect. I would assume that any chai mix might be nice, if you have that on hand. So after the tea steeps for a few moments, I add some pineapple juice from one of those little tiny cans. I store the rest of the juice in the refrigerator, and I'll use it for a few more servings over the next day or two. This cheater version isn't quite as nice as from scratch, but it's definitely better than the Tang version from the 1970s. So that is today's tea and mug. For the last few decades, I've read 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff almost every New Year's Day. It's a quick little read, funny and sweet and beautifully nerdy, about a woman in New York in the mid-20th century who orders classic books from a little bookshop in London, the vast majority of them nonfiction. First, this is not fiction itself. This is a collection of the real letters that were mailed back and forth between this outspoken Jewish New Yorker and the team at the proper British shop, especially the worker there who helped fill her orders and responded to her regular correspondence. This is just lovely. I gave a copy to my mother for the holidays soon after I first discovered it in the 1980s when I was in college. At the time, I didn't know most of the books that she mentioned, but it was absolutely unnecessary. I, over the years, have learned to love many of them. And even before I read any of them, I felt deeply connected. Several years ago, I was thrilled to discover that Sarah at Hardcover Hearts also had the tradition of reading Hanff's book each New Year's Day. And this year, Jen at the channel Jen's Reading Life hosted a reading sprint for 84 Charing Cross Road on New Year's Day. It is so lovely to see more and more people adopting it as the perfect book for the start of the year. Jen is also one of the hosts of Epistolary January, and of course 84 Charing Cross Road fits for that project too. Incidentally, a beautiful film was made of 84 Charing Cross Road, starring Anne Bancroft, Anthony Hopkins, a young Judi Dench, and others. It is wonderful. And if you'd like, I hope you will join me, James at Quaint and Curious Volumes, and Randy Ray as we discuss the film on BookTube live this coming Sunday evening. I will leave a link down below to the live stream. Okay, the other New Year's Day book I usually read is The Uncommon Reader by Alan Bennett, which sadly is a novella, not nonfiction. In the book, Queen Elizabeth finds a deep connection to reading. One day her little dogs lead her to a mobile library right outside Buckingham Palace, and there she feels duty-bound, as queens do, to check out a book. She starts with Ivy Compton Burnett, and then moves on to authors from Thomas Hardy to Marcel Proust. For her, the books aren't escapism from real life, but instead a vision into the lives of regular people. She also falls in love with talking about books. She befriends Norman, a young staff member who introduces her to gay fiction and expands her understanding of the world in other ways too. An absolutely charming little book. I always love reading these two short books at the start of the year, but this year they got me really interested in how short books work in general, both novellas and short nonfiction. I bought several shorties at the recent NYRB sale, and I'll talk about a few I've read as well as a novella recommended to me by a booktuber. I'll end with a short book I listened to on audio. There were a couple of others that I won't be mentioning today, but might in the future. But let's get started. And in fact, let's start with the NYRB titles. The first is Generations by Lucille Clifton, a work of nonfiction recounting the family history of an African-American family who lived through slavery and Jim Crow violence. The book feels far less like a memoir than like poetry. Short sections focusing on different people's lives and relationships using recurring motifs and phrases. There's a clear chronology of the basic story, but the individual sections don't necessarily have to follow in that order. Clifton's style, with its echoes and repetitions, feels like the way memory works. As readers, we piece together a family chronology and start to understand the meaning, or actually the meanings, plural, over the course of the short book, what it means to be a Dahomey woman, for example. One of the key repeated phrases takes shape and then expands. Next, I picked up Tove Jansson's Fair Play, a book fundamentally about both creativity and long-term relationships. It's the story of a visual artist and a writer who have separate studios where they do their work. Their relationship has been a long one. It isn't clearly defined here, no more than necessary, but while we get hints of moments of jealousy or irritation, what we see most of all is how their long relationship and their deep knowledge of each other shapes how they think about creativity. That is, we see how their relationship impacts their individual creative outputs, but also how their commitments to artistic expression affects their relationship too. I must say that this book is perhaps the one that most got me a little obsessed with novellas this week. Jansson adapts some modernist techniques here, not giving us a completely straightforward narrative that fits in all the pieces, but instead painting only what we need to see to understand the themes. I say that's a modernist thing, and it is, but it's also something that novellas, by definition, must encourage. That is not totally true. Certainly some novellas feel more like extended short stories, but here in Fair Play, at least, we get something of the breadth of a novel, too, just ultra-condensed into just 100 pages, hinting at a much larger scope of their relationship. Okay, during that NYRB sale, I also picked up a couple of very short books that seem to be about death and dying and grief. The first of these two was a big hit and quite a surprise. The book is My Death by Lisa Tuttle. Rather than being about death and dying, it's far more about creativity right from the beginning, and that made it a wonderful book to read right after the Jansson novella. I think I should say that if you have this on your immediate TBR, you might want to skip ahead to my discussion of the next book. I'm not going to be giving away any specific spoilers, but I want to mention, let's say, structural and thematic details. If the book isn't yet on your TBR, what I'm about to say might put it on your list. Anyway, I loved Tuttle's My Death right from the beginning. Although the main character is, in fact, a new widow, she's also a writer, and her grief matters primarily because it leads her to start a new book that is nonfiction, a literary biography of a modernist author and artist she's felt connected to for a long time, rather than the science fiction type novel which she's known for. If you've been following me for a while, you might know that literary biography is my favorite kind of book to read. So this immediately drew me in. Soon, she learns that the author she wants to investigate is still alive, in her 90s, so she sets up a meeting and goes to interview her. Now is the time to skip ahead, if you haven't yet, and you know you're going to read this one. When the main character discovers that the author she's interviewing has read all her fiction, she's floored. She talks about her surprise when she meets the interviewee's daughter, who has also read her work at the suggestion of her parent. "I liked your stories. I didn't think I would," she says. She explains that she doesn't usually read science fiction or fantasy, but, quote, "yours aren't really sci-fi, are they? They're more like myths." And it's not long after this discussion that Tuttle's novella takes a bit of a turn. Rather than being a fictionalized memoir about a witted biographer, we realize we're reading a book of an entirely different genre. For those of you who know Lisa Tuttle's previous works, which I did not at all, you might know that some of her work is sometimes considered horror. So I suppose I should say that while this book is a little mind-bending at moments, it is not at all violent or threatening. And incidentally, the NYRB edition has a very interesting introduction that brings up another quite interesting facet of the novella about what gender means in male-female relationships between two artists. It doesn't address the turn in the book or give away any plot details. To be honest, I didn't like the ending of the novella nearly as much as the beginning, and actually was a little disappointed that I didn't get an extra 300 pages about the fictive biographer talking with the fictive elderly author in a very gentle style of the initial pages. But, on the other hand, the unexpected turn that this short book took will definitely stick with me for a very long time. All right. The other book about death and dying is The Limit by Rosalind Belben. This is the story of a marriage while one spouse watches the illness and dying of the other spouse. For those of you who've been here for a while, you understand my worry that this kind of work might feel too personal or intense for me to be able to read, much less talk about on screen. Someone wrote a blurb for the back that said, in part, "I can't think of anyone writing in English whose prose is so beautiful. Beautiful prose all by itself always draws me into books." But that was not at all my experience of this novella. In general, I found the prose to be jarring and sometimes clunky, although I know that was kind of the point sometimes. I found the couple to be utterly unconvincing as people who ever loved each other in any way I would consider love. There's a lot of what I think I'll call grotesque sexuality, and I was put off by it and didn't understand what it was supposed to be adding to the book. Like all of the books on the list, The Limit is a slim little book of roughly 100 pages maybe. But I found it so unappealing that I was very, very close to DNFing it with only 15 pages to go. That actually caused me to pause a bit. Earlier in the day, I had filmed the so-called reading rules video, and I said that I was happy to abandon a book at any point, early or late. But with 10 minutes of reading left, well, I did finish it. But honestly, I really should have stopped much earlier in the book. After the Tuttle, I felt like anything could happen and I should keep going. Things could change. But no. Have any of you read it? I would really love to hear a really different opinion of the book, if you have one to share. Okay, since I'm talking about books about dying and grief, I'll go on to the next author. A few years ago, I read a really beautiful and slim little book by Max Porter called Grief is the Thing with Feathers, essentially a fairy tale about how a mythical crow takes care of a family after one parent's sudden death, and guides them through their profound grief. It is strong and muscular in a way, not overly sentimental. Interestingly, is also a novella about a character writing a literary biography, this time Ted Hughes, the very real author, of course, who had married and raised children with Sylvia Plath, and who wrote a book called Crow. Anyway, I didn't read that novella this week, but I did pick up Porter's newer novella, Shy. I listened to this one on audio from my library's digital collection, and that is a fantastic choice for this particular book. More about that soon. The first-person narrative is given by what is essentially an anti-hero, I guess, with a breathless voice and distinctive style, very different from my own. The teenage boy is a difficult character to like, unbelievably angry and saying everything in frantic bursts. He's deeply depressed, and at least in the latter part, he's drawn in shockingly sympathetic ways. I think I won't say more than that. Hearing the book read aloud works really well, but I gather that the print version conveys the character's wild narration through font size changes and margin changes, etc. Next time I'm at the library, I'm going to peek through a print copy. The last book I want to talk about today is A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland. I first heard about this lovely novella from a booktuber, but I can't remember who it was. I'm pretty sure I left a comment. Was it you? Remind me. I've seen it mentioned many other places since. This book is both charming in a way and heartbreaking. The book takes place in a small town in Wales in the 1980s and tells the story of two men who fall in love at a time when an openly gay relationship would have been shocking in their little town, and of course so many places throughout the world at that point. One of the characters owns a general store in town and lives in the apartment above. After he meets the other main character, he offers him a job and a place to stay upstairs in his tiny apartment. The two build their lives together, even though the community is basically unaware of their relationship, and it's essential for it to stay that way. As the discussion of AIDS begins to be more prominent in the 1980s, some of the community do begin to be more concerned. AIDS brings gay identity out in the open to a degree, but also makes the community more afraid. The two men who go by single initials in the novella begin to feel increasingly vulnerable and increasingly alienated in their town, while at the same time more deeply connected to each other. This is a sad and quiet story, which has a powerful resonance in itself, since this is a book about having to keep one's life silent. Thank you so much to whoever it was who first brought this book to my attention. I don't think this has been published in the US yet. I ordered a copy with some holiday money from Blackwell's in the UK. But I would suspect it might be coming out here in the US soon, given the great reviews it's getting. Well, I think I might be putting novellas behind me for a little while, although it was a lovely start to the year. I've begun to do a little background reading for one of my much larger potential reading projects, as well as for a more community-oriented reading project. And I'll discuss all of that in my next Reads and Rambles when I'm a little further along. I'd love to hear how your own reading is going so far, especially if you don't keep a channel of your own where you talk about your current reading. Any big recommendations? That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for joining me here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.